Most of you guys have seen me talk before. Props. My doors are still open. Should I start or wait? Wait. Have they been closing doors when you're supposed to start? I don't know how behind everybody is. All right, other people are starting. Are you ready to go? So, how's everybody's con going? Wow, that's pretty enthusiastic. Goodness gracious. Lots of people are coming in here today and talking about problems in the information security industry. That's a theme to say. But I haven't noticed of the people who talk about the problems very many answers to many of the problems they bring up. I'm going to talk about the art and science of communicating with your developers. This is a problem with easy answers, but it requires a certain level of understanding from someone with their foot in both camps. And there just aren't very many of those people. I happen to be one of them. And I'll go over who I am in a minute. The nice thing about this is that it is a series of problems that are really clear to understand, have social implications, but potentially technical solutions that can solve some of the really big problems that were spoken about at like the panel yesterday morning. How many people were at the opening panel? That was really good, wasn't it? I thought that was really good. I'd love to do that. Some of the developer conferences, get some security people out and do that. So I'm going to explain these problems from the middle, because that's where I live, between development and security. And then we'll talk about the solutions that I've encountered so far. So because of that, unlike my normal talks, if you ever heard me speak before, I don't normally mind if you interrupt me. This time, write down your questions, because I'm probably going to answer it in the second half of the talk. All right? So developers are difficult to communicate with, and the reason they're difficult to communicate with is because we have, we're telling them that despite what their users say, that their code sucks. And as it turns out, they don't care for that. Okay, it's like telling them their baby is ugly. Many of these developers that you're working with on a day-to-day basis consider themselves artists, and very reasonably so. Development is an art. It is very technical, but it is an art, and these people pour a lot of their own energy into the code, especially the good ones. But even the good ones make security vulnerabilities appear in their code, and it's our job to tell them about those, and this is what they go and do afterwards. We've got to solve the problem. 89% of recent breaches that have resulted in data loss were in some way due to application vulnerabilities. It is a big part. It isn't everything, and it isn't always web apps that are the problem, but it is a major problem that we have to be dealing with. Someone had to write the code that caused the breaches. We're the people who get to talk to those people. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Who am I? My name is Bill Sempf. I hang out on Twitter. That's what the @'s for, at the beginning of my name. I used to be an IRC fanatic. I spent a lot of time chatting on IRC, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. But I've switched over to Twitter, even though it's a little too hipster for me. Did I do something wrong? Even though it's a little too hipster for me in a lot of ways, because it's a global conversation, and I love that. I love to chat about this stuff. I love to bring up ideas. So if you're a Twitter person, follow me, and let's chat about application security. I'm a husband. My wife is actually an attendee this year for the first time in 3 or 4 years, sitting there between a couple folks. Yep, that's it there. She's been attending all the social engineering and and law talks and whatnot, as many of them as we can. We couldn't get up this morning for the homeschool, and so we hope Adrian's video worked for that. I'm a father. I have 2 young children, and it's just heartwarming to see the kids wandering around here. My youngest is 4, a little young to really get anything out of it. My oldest is 10, and at Circle CityCon attended Hack for Kids and is still talking about the Wi-Fi hacking clinic he did with Zero Chaos. I mean, he'll tell anybody who asks about it. He's sitting in Scouts, Weeblo Scouts, talking to people about Wi-Fi hacking. And they're like, so you didn't have the password, then you did have the password. Yes, it was awesome, and all this stuff went by on the screen. So I'm a big fan of that. I'm an author. I've written for Rocks Press when they were in Birmingham, and then when Wiley bought them in 2002, whenever it was, 2004, I moved to that. And I've written on 16 books in software development, starting with the earliest .NET books back in '99 and finishing up most recently with a Windows 8 Store apps book. And we all know how well that went, but it was a fun book to write. I consider myself a software composer. I got that term because I was sick of the term architect. It started to just mean good coder, which isn't exactly what it is I do. I'm an okay coder, but I'm not great. I got the term from a book called Lorem Ipsum. Lorem Ipsum is a 136-page children's book about software engineering, and frankly, I learned more in this book than I did in 8 years of college. So if you have a chance, pick it up, read it to your son or daughter, and learn something yourself. In the book, Lauren travels through this fantastic land with these towns that are all based on software engineering principles, both good and bad. For instance, there's the brute forcers who pile rocks up to build their edifices. When they collapse under their own weight, they pile more rocks on top of them. But then there's the composers, this beautiful land with these light, airy spires. And the people who do the work call themselves composers because they make beautiful things out of beautiful things. And that is what I do. I stand on the shoulders of giants and take code that other people have written and combine it with code that I have written and make beautiful things. That is what I like to do. Most recently, though, I'm an application vulnerability... That doesn't even fit on the damn slide, does it? Well, this is why we call everything pen testing, right? The fact is there's a bit of a difference between pen testing and vulnerability analysis. Pen testers have a very difficult job. They're given a goal, get my Etsy password file. Then they have to write down how they did it. They have to use a wide range of skills, from lockpicking to bribing the secretary to leaving USB keys outside and getting shell on workstations, all these different things. Vulnerability analysts, on the other hand, are given one application and are asked to find every flaw. And that is what I do. I take one application and find every flaw in it, then I write a report. In a way, that's harder, because a pen tester really only has to find one way in, whereas I have to find potentially all of them. In a way, it's easier. For instance, I very rarely am threatened with jail. Sometimes, but very rarely. So personally, I'm a home brewer. I've been brewing for many years, thank you. I haven't done anything recently, but I just did my hop harvest, and it's fantastic. If anybody here happens to know Fred Lee used to be a risk guy for PNC Bank. He now owns Actual Brewing in Columbus, and I have one of his centennial rhizomes growing in my yard. And so every year I get to pick those and deal with them. That was a lot of fun this year. I am also a lockpicker. I have had the pleasure of working a lockpicking event with Adrian Crenshaw, in fact, in Columbus. John Snyder, who I think snuck in the back here, recently moved to Texas, so I got to take over the Columbus Lock Sport group again. If you happen to be from Columbus, please come join us. We meet at the Columbus Idea Foundry. You can find us on Meetup. I am a ninja, no throwing. And I mean actually 5th Cube Anshinchuka Ninjutsu. I studied ninjutsu for a number of years. And it's not just a martial art. There's a lot of stealth concepts involved in it that I find very handy in this industry. I'm something of an insurrectionist. I have a habit of saying exactly the right thing at exactly the wrong time. As it turns out, this is a huge benefit in the security business, whereas it was quite a problem in the development industry. So there's where we're at. That's who I am. So let's talk about what's wrong. I want to start off with a pretty large collection of things that's wrong, but don't get depressed on me. We'll soon move to solutions, and the solutions are much easier than you think. There's a breakdown in communication between information security and development. Okay? The programmers that build the stuff and us as security people have this gap. And the gap is basically due to 4 core things that I will go over. The first is that security is concerned about risk, whereas developers are concerned about usability. Okay? The second is that security sees things in terms of vulnerabilities, whereas developers see things in terms of defects. The third thing is that security has an unnatural kind of shock-jock vocabulary when it comes to severity of things, severity of findings. And the fourth is that there's something of a culture break between the people who participate in the security industry and the people who participate in the development industry. I'm not going to lie, this middle section of the talk is kind of a rant a little bit, because I deal with this on both sides every single day, and it's gotten a little frustrating. So this is part of the reason why this talk exists. If you think you drink because you're in InfoSec, try being a developer in InfoSec. There is a reason why OWASP has flasks with their logo on it, okay? It doesn't get worse. Speaking of which. Awesome. So the first problem was risk versus usability, okay? And this is a long-running debate going back as far as we've had computer systems. Developers think of security as the Department of No. I'm sure you've all heard that before. The devs are just trying to make something nice for the users. That's what they want to do. They want to sit in a circle, hold hands, and kumbaya, smoke a little dope maybe, relax, take it easy. Everybody's happy. That's what they want. Seriously, they want their users to be happy. They go and say, hey, your password's wrong. Or, hey, our user isn't in our system. Security says, who are you? I don't even know you anymore. Get the fuck out. Right? It's username enumeration. We get uptight about this. We write it up. They say, but wait a minute. I'm trying to do something nice for the user. I'm trying to make it so that they know what to fix. Too bad. They can harvest usernames using that. Got to get rid of it. Generic error messages for this. I don't care what the problem was. Clickjacking is another one. All they want to say is allow people to frame their site if they need to. We say, didn't you see Kaminsky's talk at Black Hat? Oh my God. Right? It's not, if you don't know what clickjacking, clickjacking is UI redress of vulnerability. And more or less what I can do as a developer is if I can frame your site, I take my evilsite.com, I put an iframe on top of it, filling it up, put your site in it, turn it to invisible with CSS, cascading style sheets. Then I put my site underneath that shows through. I put my buttons strategically where your buttons would be if we were clicking to do something, transfer money, change a password, change an email address, whatever, delete all your emails in the example here provided by Jim Manico. And also you can do things like put an invisible iframe put an invisible div on top of a framed page that then collects your credentials. So I put an invisible div on top of your login box, and when the user types in their login, it actually goes to my server, and then I just redirect them to the real login page, right? So it's a real vulnerability. Like I said, Dan Kaminsky literally did a talk on Black Hat. It's on YouTube. Watch it. It's really good. But it's just not that big of a threat. You're potentially losing usernames one at a time. And it requires a phishing attack, and it's just not that severe. And the devs just want to let people frame the site. How about insufficient input validation? This is a great one. So this, of course, leads to cross-site scripting normally, but those times you just can't get it to pop, you're not sure why. Burp shows it's there, you can see it very clearly in the JSON response like this, but they've got their content type set to JSON, and there's just no place in the application where it turns into cross-site scripting. But you still want to write it up, so you write up insufficient input validation. Well, this means that the developers have to go and find all of these weird inputs in this API and do a ton of crap to it, which we'll get to a little bit later. This is why they don't like you. Another example, all these crypto vulnerabilities, Poodle, SSL v2 and v3, RC4, weak elliptic cipher. Who is going to decrypt all that traffic to your whatever page, your automobile parts research page? No one's going to. The NSA? Who's going to do this? No one's going to take the time to do this. Yet, it's PCI, and they require us to mark it a high, even. The fact is that one phone call to the help desk is 100 million times more effective than trying to decrypt the TLS cipher to get somebody's credentials. Frankly, it's probably 100 million times more effective than any of these vulnerabilities than getting somebody's credentials. It's just not that apt that these small-scale vulnerabilities get picked on, yet we write them up because we like these nice, beefy reports to, explain our nice, beefy invoices. Then the devs see it year after year after year, and they keep going back to business people and say, I don't know what these people are talking about. This doesn't make any sense to me at all. So therein lies the problem. We have another problem of vulnerabilities versus defects. It's a language issue, right? Do we really need to be talking of vulnerabilities to developers anymore? Shouldn't we be talking about bugs instead? Flaws in software? Defects? They don't care about that 0 day with the chained exploit that you put together. They don't care. They just want to know what's wrong with their code so they can fix it. But yet all of our templates and reporting are set up to describe the vulnerabilities. Yes, it's true. Some of the developers kind of get that forbidden knowledge thing and do sort of want to know the dark side of it. And it shows up in training, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But for the most part, what we need to be doing is putting our reports in such a way that they can be entered in the bug tracking, defect tracking system, which is, Jira is a defect tracking system. If not familiar with it, if you're not, you should be, and we'll get to that in a minute too. This is going to be a kind of a big sea change in the industry, but we'll talk about it a little bit more as we go on into the solutions section. So the third big piece is severity, right? We really want to shock people with the severity of our exploits, or severity of our vulnerabilities. We label the severity specifically to get the attention of management, okay? And also, frankly, it's easier to back off than it is to push it up when we realize it's worse than we thought. So we have good reasons for doing this. But it's gotten a little extreme. I mean, I have to rate the RC4 cipher a high because of PCI, but do you really know how many fucks the devs give about that? About that many. That's how many. They just don't care, and we're rating too many things high. And it's just, we're creating this blind spot in the developers. They just don't see us, they don't hear us anymore. It's that constant yammering in the corner. This is what we look like to them, okay? And there's a good reason, because that is what we look like. You get the idea? One last thing, too, that doesn't really have any solutions, but I think it requires some understanding, is that there is something of a dramatic personality difference between the kind of people who do development and the kind of people who do information security. Sometimes you just find that two different categories of people don't have enough in common to have a meaningful conversation. And this is one of those cases. There's not a lot we can do about that. And you probably all know one of those men, right? It's Chris Nickerson, of course. If you don't know him, you should. The other one is Scott Hanselman, who is kind of the poet fool of Microsoft. Fool makes it sound bad, but I mean fool in the gesture sense. Brilliant technologist who's also a trained theater guy and stand-up comic, and his talks are amazing, mind-blowing. Never seen two different persons. If they were in the same room, there might be like an issue with physics. And they pretty much mark a lot of the chasm between development and InfoSec. There's not a lot we can do about that. The careers draw different kinds of people. Okay, the reason why I'm in both is because I'm so socially awkward, it doesn't matter anyway. I don't fit in with anybody. So because of that, I kind of fit in with everybody. But, thank you. But I know normal people, they work with people best who sit with them best. Yeah, normal people. Thanks, Gab. So yeah. So that culture divide lends itself to another whole category of problems, right? That there's a different language. And I touched on it a little bit, but as a community, as a department, whatever, we're just not speaking in a language that our customers, who are the developers in many cases, understand, right? We ask ourselves questions like, why don't developers sanitize their inputs? Have you ever sat in just another readout call and remembered that reflected cross-site scripting was in the last report and the one before that and the one before that, and you're thinking, why don't they just sanitize their inputs? Well, I'll explain why. Programming is really, really hard. Have you tried? And I don't mean Python scripting added a Metasploit module. I mean in a structured environment, in a statically typed language, with libraries given to you by architects that left the company 8 years ago, with a style guide, with 5-year-old development tools, and then make the software work and make it secure, it's not easy to do. And then you've got 15 people to please, and that's before you get to the users. Another thing that we have to understand in this language is that we don't speak to the software development cycle. As it turns out, developers have a schedule. They have features they have to implement at a certain time in a certain way. This is what it looks like, okay? We need to, no matter what, whether it's months-long traditional documented cycle or weeks-long agile, super quick, let's get user cards and do it all with pencil cycles, like the hipsters do, you know. You always have to decide what the software is going to do, decide how it's going to do it, decide how we're going to convince the damn computer to do it for us, build it, test it, get it out there, keep it working, and eventually get rid of it. Those things have to happen every time, no matter what. And guess what is going to happen when you walk in the middle of the QA cycle and say, gotta fix these bugs for next deployment? They just aren't going to do it. It's not even that they don't want to. The fact is that the software development lifecycle is very, very rigid, even in the agile methodologies. Supposedly, agile, you're supposed to be able to move around. Isn't that what agile means? But it's not. They're very structured. Developers are very structured. Their software tools are very structured. Throwing a document at them in the middle of the cycle isn't going to get you anywhere. It will get put in a drawer. And we simply, as a community, don't understand that. Instead, we need to get buy-in from business. If business, and I have a whole section on solutions, but I couldn't resist using this slide and saying this here because it's important. We need to find somebody who can prioritize the security problems on the business side to solve this problem. We need to understand that that's who the developers are listening to, is the business side. It's not unlike your normal social engineering efforts, folks, all right? You just got to find the people who actually make the decisions. One more important thing, too, on the language side, you need to understand the platform your developers are building with. And I've got the big players and big boxes here. But the fact is, in Java, there's a really big difference between Java Beans and like WebSphere or something like that. You have to understand what the platform is. If you're ASP.NET, are you web forms or are you MVC? Do you even know? Do you know what version of MVC you're on? Do you know what that implies? You need to actually understand that. And I don't mean you went, you watched the launch video in MSDN or something like that. I mean, actually understand. If you do not have your development tools installed on your workstation, there's a problem. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to push the button. Those are the ones I was talking about earlier. So yes, the big players, right? So, we know what the problems are now, right? We've got a culture rift, we've got language problems, mostly about naming and severity, but other things too, and there's generally a lack of mutual understanding. These are all social problems, and most of us aren't really solid social people. So what are we going to do exactly? Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. There's 3 things you need to focus on, okay? First is automation. Second is, well, everything else, the stuff we shouldn't automate, right? And then third is trying to find ways to hone the relationships without having to be a psychologist, okay? This is not unlike your average social engineering effort, right? You need to understand the problems, the social problems, in order to implement technical solutions. You need to have mapped the relationships. I mean, I don't mean you need to necessarily start a multi-go file on your company, but it might not be a horrible idea, frankly. So, let's start with automation. So let's automate what we can. So much of this stuff ends up being done by hand or just ignored because we have the machines doing the wrong things, right? Where we can, we just need to script it and forget it. The effort requires joint work between InfoSec and development because you don't know where their build server is. And they don't have any idea what needs to be done. You've got to work together. The first thing you want to do is give them the tools to do their job, okay? Make sure developers and QA have security tools at their disposal. One of the smartest things I've ever done is give Zap to QA. It's free, it's good, and they really like it. Because QA people, good ones, really get off on breaking software, just like we do. They just view it a little differently. They want to break it from the business process side. But if you show them that, hey, by the way, the fact that you can type Japanese characters in there and you shouldn't be able to, probably means you can type angle braces in there and you shouldn't be able to. Look what you can do then. Oh, that's slick. You bet it is. Let's look for some more, right? There aren't enough AppSec people, and I'll get into this a little bit more later. This is how we make more, okay? I've got a client in Columbus, did training, said, hey, we're going to send all our devs to your app security training. Awesome. Make sure QA's there too. QA, why? Because QA is already testing your apps. Shouldn't they be looking at security? Yes, they should, of course, right? QA shows up. Got 2 locations, a group in Cleveland, group in Columbus. We're doing all this stuff, doing this training. Gave the training, did all the demos, did everything in Zap. It's awesome. Afterwards, devs were all like, hey, it was really awesome. I learned a ton. I didn't know that stuff. I'm going to go read up about it and get that book. Thanks a lot, leaves. 8 QA people in the room, kept me there for another hour, asking questions. Well, how do I tie this into my testing session with, how do we build it? Can we integrate this with Jira so we can send them right? They really, the good ones, like I said, they already like to break the software, and they really very much enjoy finding new ways to solve the problems they face every day, and Zap is a fantastic one. They already know how to use Fiddler, probably, and the F12 tools. This is just a slightly better version from our perspective. That's all it is. Then, on the development side of things, get people using Python to automate their tools. You'd be amazed how many really phenomenally talented developers don't know any scripting languages. They .NET or Java, Ruby, well, Ruby is technically a scripting language, I guess, but they can just write all this fantastic code, but if they need to whip something out real quick to move some files over here and check their integrity of them, they write a console app in C#. I was one of those people for 15 years, I kid you not. Way back in the day I knew Perl, back in the early 90s, but when Perl kind of fell out of favor and it all diverted and everything got messed up, I just kind of built everything, and I just would build everything in C#. So giving developers the tools and showing them how to use the tools to automate tasks that should be fairly straightforward is a great start towards aiming towards more secure code, because you can check things, you can modify things, you can take care of your source code better with a tool like Python than you can with many other things. And it's not just for the developers, right? Build your deployment scripts in Python. If you don't want to get a big fancy tool like Octopus or something like that to do the big large scale deployments, if you're in a medium sized shop and you look and you say $12,000 a year is a lot just to move my code, but you need to use something for deployment, because otherwise you end up moving up the wrong copy of the web config file and leaving all your comments in your JavaScript, and we find your developers' names and look them up on Stack Overflow. Not that that would ever happen, but deployment scripts are good too. So your DevOps people probably are already Pythonistas anyway, but get that tie-in, right? Make sure that the developers understand what they can do with those tools. So automatic static analysis is a good counterpoint to this, okay? Tools for the people are good. Tools for the machines are even better, right? So let's automate ourselves a little bit of static analysis. So what is static analysis, right? It's testing the program at rest, testing a piece of software at rest, looking at the source code for potential vulnerabilities. Devs hate static analysis. The reason why is, and they're gonna push back if you try to implement it. The reason why is because it's most often for developers used for style checking, which no two developers agree on. All right, where you put your curly braces, tabs versus spaces, all that stuff. But it's a very, very powerful tool for security checking under some circumstances. So there's a lot of good tools, and I'm not going to go over them all. I'm certain you can go walk around, and the vendors will be more than happy to talk to you about static analysis. However, there aren't very many free tools, because static analysis is a development tool, and what do we learn about development? It's hard. Actually doing static analysis is very hard, and only recently actually have the tools become any kind of decent, well, recently, maybe in the past 6-7 years. I personally have used Fortify, which is now owned by HP. I've used Veracode. I've used Checkmarks, and I like them all for different things and for different kinds of shops. You're going to have to do some analysis on your own to figure out what's best for you, but use the vendors. Developers like vendors. Security people hate them because everybody's coming to us and saying, hey, here's this one thing you put in your network to solve all your problems. No developer tool vendor does that. Developer tool vendors are very, very focused. Hey, listen, here's a plugin for Visual Studio that will give you really easy access to really sophisticated source control modules, and it's only $150. Awesome, I'll take 30. I mean, that's how it works with devs. I was shocked when I started moving into the dev industry, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, how much everybody hated the vendors. I understand why, but it's not like that for devs. So what do static analysis tools do well? The first thing they do well is they check your input validation, right? They can look and make sure that you aren't, so in input validation we have sources and we have sinks. Where this input comes from and where it could go that then it gets reflected back on the screen or processed by a back-end system or whatever. It's relatively easy for an automated system to discover that. Now, they can make false positives, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it is relatively easy to find. We talk about bounds checking, right? Buffer overflow, fence post problems, things where counting is involved. Computers are very good at counting. They're very good at looking at source code and figuring out that you've made a mistake with your counting. They're also very good at finding deprecated code, and this is where it's really interesting. Dated libraries, old algorithms, incorrect encryption, all these pieces, even when you're using parts of the language that there's a better version for, static code analyzers find those very, very easily. However, you have to have a triage process. If you run Veracode and throw a 300-page report over the wall to the developers, it will get thrown away. I have done it 150 times in my career. Literally just thrown the report away. Click, delete, fuck, I don't care. It doesn't do me any good. It's page after page after page of, well, this might be exploitable. I don't have time for this, man. I've got features I've got to get in place. We're trying to finish up this feature. I've already got to do the story cards for the next sprint. I don't have time for this. You must do triage. You must do triage and then translate it into something that the developers will understand, as we'll talk about in a minute. Automatic dynamic analysis is good at certain things too, right? So we don't want to just scan the source code, we want to scan the running app. So what dynamic scanning does is it uses a template of a site. So how many people here have used Burp Suite or Z-Attack Proxy? So you're familiar with it. So Burp Suite, the idea is you generate a sitemap. You use the site as a user would and find all the content, put in real data. Burp remembers everything you said, all the requests. Then you say, okay, go look for other content, and it'll spider anything else that it discovers. And you can go through those and submit any other forms. Then you say, all right, go scan. Here's the interesting forms I'm interested in. Go scan. And it will go and look for certain things that it finds well based on the data you provided. So it's not completely automated. You have to set up that template first, but once you've done it, it's very powerful. So automatic or dynamic scanners are good at looking at output encoding, the other side of command injection and cross-site scripting. Someday people are going to figure out how to really put that together and genuinely able to find all the weird cross-site scripting out there. It's going to happen someday, but it's not going to happen today. They're very good at discovering information disclosure, okay? Where your API is leaking primary account numbers or developers' names in comments or birth dates or credit card numbers. I said that already. Or I wish I had notes on this slide, and I don't. It's really good at discovering exceptions, okay? So while it's scanning your site, it generates exceptions, and it remembers, hey, look, I got an exception back, and it has source code in it. It can see that and report it back to you. It would take you forever to do that manually because you'd have to try all these manual things and look at every single response, but it does it very quickly. So anything that's very response-driven, not request-driven, is something they can find very well. Auth problems, too, right? Cross-site request forgery, insufficient authentication. No. Yes, authentication. All those kinds of pieces of stuff that the machine finds well. But once again, there's a human element here. You absolutely must triage. Just like with the source code scanning, if you throw over the static or dynamic analysis report, it will get thrown away. I have thrown away more of these than I have of static code analysis, I guarantee you. It's just not useful by itself. You must have a triage process in place. So that leaves us to another way of looking at this. Sometimes the human has to do the job. I know I just attached a bunch of human tasks to these automated ones. I'm sorry about that. But sometimes things need to be done, by a real person. So the reason why humans are needed for some of this is because of insight. Okay? We can make connections that the machine simply can't make, like cross-site scripting. we can make the connection mentally between the input, which the code scanners do well, and output, which the dynamic scanners do well. We can do that ourselves. So there's some things that need to be done by a person. Pen testing is the obvious one. What is pen testing? Or application vulnerability analysis, which doesn't fit on the slide, so I put pen testing there. See, my intro was good for something. It is manual dynamic analysis. Okay? There's automated dynamic analysis. There's manual dynamic analysis. That's what vulnerability analysis is. Some things only a human is going to see. Only a human is going to look at that post, or this get, and say, I wonder what happens when I iterate that number. A machine is not going to do that. A machine has a preset list of fuzzing. It's just going to insert there and report on the results. It is not going to think, I wonder what happens if I make that a 7. By the way, you know what happens if you make that a 7? You get the next Facebook user. Try it sometime. Use API version 1. It's still good until like 2018. You can write a Python script, 11 lines, download everybody in Facebook. Pretty cool. Only a human is going to go find the developer's name in an HTML comment, look it up on Stack Overflow, and find the database password. No machine's going to do that. Only a human can do this. Okay? So there's some things that the humans do well. But the fact is you're still going to have to explain the results because the coders are over there following their little process, cutting their code with their headphones on. And if you give them that pen test, even though the pen test report is only 30 pages, unlike 300 pages, they're still going to throw it away because it's written in a language they don't understand. And you need to fix that. Also remember, third-party testers will not understand your environment. You must take that into consideration, okay? They are not going to know the different tiers of your application, what all the services are for, the fact that some of them don't matter because they're not public-facing. There's 1,000 examples. Sometimes you can build a long-running relationship with a vendor. Sometimes you can do things internally. But frankly, most of the time, the report will be a black box. And that doesn't make it any easier for the developers because then the report's really written in a language that developers don't understand because the person who wrote the report didn't understand the environment. Not because they're bad people, just because that's the way it works. So we've got automated static analysis, automated dynamic analysis, manual dynamic analysis. The last would be manual static analysis, which is personal code review. I like to talk about glass top code review. And this is something that devs do anyway. All you need to do is insert your own code review standard, a discrete list, a short, discrete list of things to look for. Short, not like this talk, actually short. Then have the humans check the things that they can do well. Make sure that the access control meets the standard. Make sure it's encrypted properly. Look for backdoors the developers have left, because those are unlikely to be found accidentally by your static or dynamic tools. But you know what? When the devs leave the company, they're going to remember they're there and show their friends at Friday night after they've had a couple drinks. Trust me, it happens. Making sure sensitive data handling is properly, secure service calls, talking to the database over a secure channel, things like that. That's stuff that's much easier for a human to just look for than for a machine to find. SOAP and REST communication between the tiers of your application. And most importantly, logging. Never something that the tools are going to find for you in any case, but absolutely so important when you're dealing with disaster recovery and incident response. Very key to make sure the logging follows your standards. Humans have foresight. They can look ahead and think about potential issues they can run into. If you fix the problems before they occur, your life is oh so much better. I think that's Ruben next door, by the way, which I would totally be in his talk if I wasn't giving one. So he's the first one I'm going to watch when it gets up. So, as it turns out, there's a list for this. All right? The Proactive Top 10 is an OWASP project. How many people know what OWASP is? Okay, half of you are either asleep or don't know, so I'll tell you. It's the Open Web Application Security Project. It's a non-profit international organization that is entirely designed to do what I'm doing right now, which is spread the word about web application security. They're specifically about spreading it to developers, where I try to do both. Come up here and say as a developer and talk to the security people and vice versa. So they have projects in place and also local chapter meetings, which you should be going to. Is there a Louisville OWASP chapter? Does anybody know? Louisville OWASP chapter? There's the chapter leader of the Louisville OWASP chapter. Go see him after my talk. So the proactive controls were developed by Jim Manico, Jim Bird, and Katie Anton, and a cast of thousands. Many of us have participated in it, myself included. And what they are is a list of security techniques that should be included in the design of every single project. Okay, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about what are the first two? The first two are, we would call them cross-site scripting, SQL injection, command injection, right? But they're spoken in dev language. These are the things that you have to talk about. Parameterizing your queries, encoding your data, validating your inputs. I guess I should have said the first three, right? Authentication, authorization, and access control make up a third of the OWASP top 10. Here they are. Implement appropriate access controls, establish identity, right? Protect data and privacy. Then we get, well, of course, implement logging. We talked about that earlier. But then we get into the architectural side of things, leveraging security features of your framework, because you now all know your framework because you listened to the beginning of the talk and went and found out. Include security-specific requirements in your requirements gathering. Design and architect security in. These are the controls that you can use as foresight. So I talked a little bit about the digital divide earlier. And there's a real social division between InfoSec and Dev, and it's true. And none of us are particularly good social people. We're good engineers and taking advantage of vulnerabilities in humans, but building relationships is sometimes hard for this community. Things like this are fantastic, but not all of us, even with this, have the skills to do that. I've had a lot of luck feeding developers. No, it's true, I have. It just works well with so many things. For instance, training, which we all have to do or get done. Devs listen better when they're fed. It's true. And not just pizza. We've all had pizza at the .NET users group and stuff. I mean, good food. I've had a lot of luck with a pattern like this. We start out with some security principles, right? Minimize attack surface areas, establish secure defaults, the things you heard before, principal least privilege, defense in depth, fail securely, all the things that are in the OWASP standardized mantra here. And then we turn that into testing your own stuff, right? Training with Z attack proxy, understanding what the attack postures are. And then finally, we turn to secure coding. Look at what your platform offers as far as security, how best to implement it, roll that back into security principles. Just keep going around in a circle, round in a circle. Where do you find materials for this? Send you back to OWASP. Go search for training materials. You might want to try to just go to Google and say OWASP training materials. All of Ian and Manico's slides are up there. You can use them to do the training. Feed them. You'd be surprised how receptive they'll be. It's very hard to find application security people. Recent client of mine, one of their people got burnt out and left. This is going to be funny because one of the people that worked for that company is sitting in that crowd, so I'm trying not to look at him. And they tried to hire somebody using their own recruiting group, and it didn't work as well. And so they did what most companies do and blast it out to the world using Bullhorn and everything. And I got 46 phone calls in 6 weeks for the position, because my title on LinkedIn for 6 years has been Application Security Architect, which, as it turns out, that's turned into the term for what those people do. I don't know, the people who do the AppSec stuff. Finally, the guy called me directly. The recruiter at the company called me directly and said, "Can you just come help us out?" I said, "Well, sure, I'll come help you out." So I came and helped him out. And it's good stuff. Actually, a lot of I do this with many people. I'm just an independent, by the way. I'm just myself and Gabrielle run our own company. I don't work for anybody. I'm just me and her. And well, I'm me and you know what I mean, right? So the fact is that we have to make more AppSec people. There aren't enough of them. When you train them, you find that they like it. If you teach, don't just train, teach. Actually get into stuff. You all love this, or you wouldn't be in it, because it's draining the life out of all of us. You must love it. Send that enthusiasm through the wire. Teach them how to use the tools. We're all in this as a group. All right? We're just all building tools for people to do cool things on the internet, right? We're trying to effectively solve the same problems. Developers trying to make the users' lives better with better software. The protector wants to make sure that the people that use the software don't get screwed. I'm on both of those camps. Sometimes I don't get along with me. Okay, I understand how this all works. But the fact is that social skills aren't really our thing, but we need to at least understand what the developers are going through. When was the last time you used your developer tools that your developers used? Walk in their footsteps for a week, right? Do you know what your source control system is? If I ask you right now to go into the system and get the production version, could you look at the code? Okay, I'm seeing some nodding heads. That makes me happy. Well, if you don't, do that. So where does this leave us? We didn't talk about threat modeling in this talk because it's too long as it is. I only have a couple minutes left. That's a whole other thing. But what I found very useful is really a three-part thing that kind of breaks into 4 parts, so I like this graphic for it. At the top, we start to get the architects on both sides involved with threat modeling, okay, which we'll do next year at Derbycon maybe. Then, static analysis, both automated and manual, and dynamic analysis, both automated and manual, all wrapped around with a soft, chewy middle of training. Okay? This is how we start to build some kind of a social dynamic, a technical solution to a social problem. We build things that the developers and the security people have to work on together. There's no other choice. You must work on it together. Because we're all on the same team in the end. Right? We're really all just trying to make things happen. We need to sit around the table understanding that everybody at the table does something slightly different well. I should have put the graphic up. You know the graphic that everybody talks about with the imposter syndrome? And it's got, here's what you do well, a circle in the middle, and here's what everybody else does well with the little circles all the way around you, and it looks like you're like surrounded by all this knowledge, but really they're just little circles themselves, just like you are. That, in a nutshell, is the development and security divide. I know it sounds like I'm up here shouting platitudes, but sometimes it's a platitude because it's true, It really is. Got to remember that security is not the developer's first or second or third concern, and frankly, it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be in this position, but we are. So we need to make sure that security is our concern, and we're supporting them. They need to understand that we've got a job to do, and they need to work with us. When we get the tie-in, we all have to give a little teeny bit. I'm at Sempf on Twitter. A lot of this will get written up on a blog post that will show up at 2 o'clock. I wrote it earlier, and it'll show up at 2 o'clock. Feel free to go reread it, solidify it in your mind. Look me up on Twitter if you have anything. I'll take any questions anybody has now. Other than that, I will see you all at the rest of the con, and thank you very much.